Thank you so much, Mike. I thought Mike was asking how many astronauts are in the room, and 6 people raised their hands. I was like, that is really cool. I am super excited to be with you all today. Thank you so much for having me. So I come here every week. I know there's quite a few of you who are living the life you want to live, who are entrepreneurs, who have started your own thing, who are following your passion. I also get the sense that there's more than a few people in the room who do wake up or have at some point in their lives and felt like they're in a David Byrne song and wondering how they got here, how they ended up in this house with this partner and this job. How'd you end up like that proverbial frog in the water and it's getting a little bit warmer and a little bit warmer? And you realize that at some point in your life, you stopped listening to that little kid that knew what was right, that knew what you wanted, that knew what you were into, and started listening instead to your mother, your father, your teacher, your friend, your sister, your cousin, society in general, that told you what you should be doing with your life. And then you forgot to jump out. Familiar to anybody? All right, so let's start here. This is me 20-something years ago. I was about halfway through a 13-year journey of moving 13 times. I went from place to place, relationship to relationship, project to project, and I had a lot of fun. And I always felt like I was doing good. I did 2 years of Urban Peace Corps. I ran Vermont's first internet cafe and community center. Gives you a sense how old I am. I DJ'd a drag show for a little while. I made a documentary about a day in the life of the New York City hot dog vendor, pre-9/11. And then at some point, I ended up in LA. And when 9/11 happened, like for many Americans, it was a wake-up call for me. At the time, my paid gig was anger management counselor for schizophrenic incarcerated adults who were pissed off to be in so many anger management groups. And my side hustle was getting a nonprofit hip-hop youth arts center off the ground. And I realized I was getting really burnt out. But it wasn't the people I was working with. It was actually just this sense I was coming to grips with that I didn't know how to make my mark, and I didn't know where I belonged. So Anne Lamott says, "My mind is like a bad neighborhood. I try not to go there alone." That's what I realized I felt like. I've learned a lot in those few years about anxiety and ADD and not belonging and all those things that kept me from figuring out my path. But right around that time, somebody gave me this book by Brian Weiss on past lives. And then I went to this workshop on intuition and psychic development. I didn't tell anybody because that was not part of my repertoire. And I started doing some guided meditations, and this whole other world opened up for me. And I started getting really into learning about energy and spirituality and different world traditions. But the real catalyst for me came a few years later when this little guy came out to the world. Many of you have met my son, Miles. He's been here. The day he got here, head full of hair, purple eyes wide open, and I had that moment. We locked eyes, and I realized he's a little bit me. He's a lot of dad. And he's a whole lot of something way other than all of that. And that was it for me. I knew for me that there was something beyond the 5 senses. There was something beyond the 6 senses. And I decided to go to seminary. I went to an interfaith seminary in New York. My seminary was started by a rabbi, a priest, and a swami, like a bad joke. And I got there, and that was it. I found my tribe. I found my community. I was home. The best choice I ever made. No idea what I was going to do with it. Just as we were about to get ordained, we're about to step out on stage. We've been practicing these songs for our ordination ceremony. They're about to put the stoles on us and tell us that we're ministers. And the music minister gathers us around. And he says, "Look, Just want to tell you something before you step out there. Just remember, it is forever you will be called Reverend. And I was like, what? I've never been anything forever. I've never been anything more than about 18 months. So I don't know what I'm going to do with that. It was an amazing feeling. It was totally terrifying and totally exciting, and that moment changed me forever. My best friends at the time asked me to marry them. So I said, okay, I'll try that out. My very first ceremony was a Mexican Catholic woman and a Thai Guatemalan Buddhist man. Multicultural, interfaith, bilingual. I completely fell in love with it. Over 500 ceremonies later, I still love every second of it. If somebody had told me before all this that my passions, my love of drama and creativity and bringing people together would culminate in being a minister, I would have laughed in their faces. But it's the best thing I ever did. And the reason I share this is because here's what happened. Really early on into starting my wedding business, maybe 6 months into it, I realized that for the first time in my life, I'm waking up every day, loving what I'm doing. It's meaningful work. I'm good at it, and I'm making a living at it. I never had that alignment before. At the same time, I'm working with couples, and I'm doing a lot of premarital counseling. And at some point in our sessions, it comes up, hey, you know, what's up for work? How you doing with work? I'm overwhelmed. Oh, man, work is super frustrating. I don't know, I kind of fell into it. I don't know if this is what I'm supposed to do with my life, but you know, I went and I got a good degree and I got a job and it pays well and whatever, I mean, and then they would stop. Invariably, they would stop and they'd say, oh, never mind. You know, work's work. I shouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth. I'm so lucky to have something. I've got a good partner, we've got a home, we're here to talk about relationships, never mind. Once I heard some variation on that enough times, the light bulb went off for me. I realized that in our society, as open and as progressive as it is, there is still this sense, I think for men especially, that you are to get something secure and something stable and be a good provider and take care of those you love. And if you love it, more power to you. But that's bonus, right? The idea that you're supposed to go out first and figure out what you love to do, that's a luxury. Well, I don't buy that. I don't think it is. I think for most of us, doing what you love every day, what you feel purposeful about, is closer at hand than people think. But what do you do if you already feel like you fell into something and you're on that hamster wheel and you're stuck with it every day, right? How do you step off and make that overhaul? So here's the deal. How many of you, raise your hand, if you've ever been absolutely convinced that you were ready to stop a bad habit and then fell back into it? So here's why. We are wired, we are neurologically programmed to stick with what's familiar to us even when the familiar sucks. Those pathways have been routed in our brains over and over and over and over and over again. And sometimes it's a bad habit. It's smoking, it's biting your nails, whatever it is. Sometimes it's a thought. Why would I go be an artist? Why would I go be an astronaut? Do you know how few people make it at that? What are my chances? How slim is that? And those are the thoughts that we reinforce over and over and over and over again. How long does it take to make or break a habit? Call it out if you think you know. Forever. I love that. Okay, so 21 days is what's in popular culture. Sorry, it's a myth. The average amount of time it takes for something to feel like your new normal, guess?
66.
All right, somebody read my bio. Nice, you're right. The average amount of time is 66 days. So if you're starting on a new thing, you need to do it regularly for 2 to 3 months. And here's the trick. Willpower is not enough. You have to add in layers. motivation, accountability, things like that to keep you going for that time. But here's the cool part. Did you know that about 40% of what we do every day are just habitual, but we didn't choose it? They're things we fell into without thinking about it. If you make a conscious choice to try something new, and you do it consistently and you get support for 2 to 3 months, it then moves to a different part of your brain. How cool is that? So you use your prefrontal cortex to make a decision, and so every morning you have to wake up and choose, and it's hard, right? Every day you have to go, I said I was going to meditate. I don't feel like it, I'm tired, right? And you do that every single day, and it's effort. But at some point, it actually moves into a different part of the brain. Do you think about the agony of brushing your teeth every day? Does that feel agonizing anymore? For most of us, no, because it's in a different part of the brain. It's become habit, okay? But it takes a while. So I'm going to share with you a very non-traditional thing for Friday coffee. Y'all are going to bear with me, and I'm going to take you through an exercise to figure out how to tap back into that part of you that knows what you've always wanted, so you can make decisions from that place. So I'm going to invite you all, if you're comfortable, close your eyes. Take a couple deep breaths. Feel yourself grounded in this space. Feel your feet grounded. I want you to imagine that standing before you is the person or the entity, if you're spiritual, or the energy that sees you and knows you the most unconditionally. If you're lucky enough to have a parent or a partner or a friend that you feel can absolutely see you at your highest and best, and otherwise if you have the sense of God, the divine, universal energy, whatever you label it, that person or entity is beholding you. They're seeing you at your absolute best. If they could see you in your flow, if you're an artist or an athlete, if they could see you in those moments of innovation, of creativity, and your purest and best, that person or entity beholds you and says, I love this person so much because really, at their heart of hearts, at their deepest core, you are the embodiment of this, and this. What are those 3 or 4 or 5 things that capture you at your best essence? When you feel like you have those 3 or 4 things, you can come back to this space, feel your feet again, open your eyes when you're ready. I want you to hold on to those 3 or 4 things. When I do sessions with clients, I call that your core. I will write those words on the top of every single page of notes for every session. That exercise, now my research is in decision-making and navigating major change and how our minds process it. And that exercise, as hokey as it might have felt for some of you, is the simplest and most profound tool I have ever found for making a decision. Here's why. You can take any choice in your life. Do I want to hang out with that person? Do I want to take that phone call when I'm playing with my kids? To the big ones. Do I want to stay in this job? Do I want to stay in this relationship? Do I want to finally follow that dream that I've always had? And you can ask yourself, is it likely to take me closer or further from that core essence? That's it. The reason it works, Stephen Covey, the guy who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? In the simplest of terms, he talks about we spend too much of our lives prioritizing what feels urgent. that next text message, the social media feed, the boss's requests of us, our family's requests of us, and not enough time on what's important but doesn't have a deadline. If you can make decisions from that core essence, you're tapping into what is important to you. This is what you value above all else. Now, how do you put it into practice? Here's the last piece of it. This guy is Steve Fisher, voted 3 times world's best all-around kayaker. I had the privilege of seeing him give an amazing talk. Super cool guy. The way to do this is to pick one thing, make it very small and very concrete, and make sure it pushes the heck out of your boundaries, because that's how your brain gets rewired. That's how you're lighting it up in a new place. And that's how you get to tell yourself, if you do that thing in the next 24 hours, if you do that small task, 2 things are happening. One is you become that person who's willing to risk things and make it happen. And 2, you develop trust in yourself. I said I was going to do it and I did it. Now I say I'm going to do the next thing, I'm going to do it. So how do you do it towards something that you've never done before? Here's what he had to say. We're experiencing a bit of the fear that once you take that first step, the journey will take on a life of its own and you won't be able to stop. Perhaps even the fear of success, right? There's also a central question there. How do you prepare for something that's never been done before? Well, I specialize in doing things that have never been done before. And I can tell you that, quite frankly, you can't fully prepare for that. All you can do is use the set of tools that you have at your disposal and take the first step. Once you take that first step, that step teaches you how to take the next step. That's all there is to it. So right now, if you haven't already, here's my challenge to you. Think of one very small, very concrete thing you are going to do in the next 24 hours that's going to bring you closer to your core and towards that life that you've been thinking about, whatever the blocks are, whatever the things are that you say, how did I fall into that? That's going to take you away from that and push your boundaries. Maybe you send an email to the founder that you most admire. Maybe you sign up for an event that you're going to go to alone that's going to scare the heck out of you. Maybe you make a difficult phone call. What are you going to do in the next 24 hours? I'm going to give you a moment to think about it. There's a last piece to all this I want to share with all of you. This piece about identity, to me, it has a lot to do too with connection, with community. When you live your purpose, it's this sense of connection, of being with the people that you care about, of being in it together. And they've actually done some new research and found that there's actually 3 reasons scientifically proven for current levels of unhappiness. Disconnection from nature, disconnection from your values, and disconnection from other people. So when you can tap into those 3 things, that's where that fulfillment and that sense of purpose comes from. I'm going to share one more quote with you. This is from an article by a guy who writes brilliant newsletters. I'll tell you if you want to ask me after. His name is Eric Barker. He's out of UCLA. To prevent feeling lonely, we must share something with those around us. Something meaningful to both you and them. A belief, a cause, an activity, a goal. We need to be in it together, not merely together in the middle of a faceless crowd. So on that note, I have a plug. Many of you have heard me talk about this. If you want to come join me in what I feel purposeful about, I am very excited. I am collaborating with these 2 amazing men over here. Jordan Martin, the founder of Lionborn, who's a branding and marketing wizard, and Dan Davidson, the founder of Rosebud Coffee and Rose City Church, who is the first speaker that I saw at Friday Coffee. And I approached him after and said, hey, let's start something together if you're up for it. I've always wanted to do something around social entrepreneurship And so we are now doing a monthly social entrepreneurship meetup. The idea is to bring together people who do multi-layered community problem solving in innovative ways to get inspired by them and to connect with each other. And we're super excited because we got our dream speaker the first time around, Robert Egger of LA Kitchen. If you're not familiar with LA Kitchen, they are a 20,000 square foot warehouse that employs the formerly incarcerated, the homeless, and youth aging out of foster care, takes reclaimed produce and creates healthy food for the elderly. Amazing, right? So he will be speaking. Their tickets are free, but there's limited seating. So there's the website. It's also on Meetup. And that's what I have for you today. If you want to learn more about decision making or navigating major change, or you just want to share with me what you set for yourself, I would really love to hear from all of you, and I will help hold you accountable to it too. Thank you for having me.
Don, that was amazing. Totally heartfelt. Who needed to hear that message today, by the way? Raise your hand if you don't mind being vulnerable. Wow. Okay, so admittedly, I'm having a really, let's say, eccentric week, and if you guys can relate, this was just very timely. I don't know if it's because there's like 6 planets in retrograde. Always Mercury, right? Gosh darn Mercury. But that was very heartfelt, and we really appreciate the message, because I think a lot of times people get pushed off track because life gets in the way, and it perturbs us and disrupts us, and it can help us lose productivity. So this is very important for anyone that's, entrepreneurial, working on a project that hasn't quite come to fruition, which I totally relate to. So thank you so much, Don. Really appreciate that. All right, we're gonna open up to Q&A now. John will walk around with the mic if you have a question. Given the format, just stick to questions, or we're gonna have time for a little bit of, if it's a relevant story, maybe something like that, just because I think the format's a little unique and it allows for that. The presenter and the message. So yeah. So a little storytelling allowed for today. Thanks.
Oh, there we go. Check.
And I'm also collecting business cards for the tickets raffle that we're going to have at the end of this for the Arboretum. Tickets are $86, so we're giving away sets of 2. So hopefully.
There you go.
Wait, what is this for again?
Arboretum, there's a concert.
Oh,
Michael
okay.
Feinstein's a conductor.
What's the date on the concert?
I'm not sure. The tickets are in here if you can take a look at it.
August 18th at 5:30 p.m.
Don, really enjoyed your presentation and your talk, because it was very inspiring, as Mike alluded to. Can you share a few more stories? I mean, it seems like that's very inspirational. People that you've worked with, people that you've counseled, and how that has made a difference in their lives. And I'm sure that part of it was very rewarding to you, but can you share that with us?
Oh, thank you, John. Appreciate that. I can share a couple of specifics, but the more is the general, which is people come in when they're really at that crossroads. What I tell people is the limbo is the hardest part. One of my clients talks about that's the time where you're ruminating yourself into the ground. I love that phrasing of it. It's like you're bouncing these ideas off the echo chamber of your own mind, or maybe 1 or 2 other people, and the trick is the action. So, one of my clients was actually doing really, really well, very high level in the corporate world, but had always wanted to work for himself. So when I asked him average amount of time to make change, he said 14 days. He's the only client I had who, that really held true. Everything that would take somebody else 4 or 5 months, he just ramped it up by, 3 times that. So we were on a schedule to, set an exit date and tell the bosses he was leaving, and he walked out 30 days earlier and had a thriving consulting business within a month or 2, and is doing really, really well. But for a lot of my clients, it is that thing about letting go of that creative and artistic side and not knowing how to get back to it. And what we do, what the work is how to make the initial decisions, and then how to lay out a roadmap that works for navigating major change. It's never about walking out the door that day. What I always tell people is it's going to happen way slower and way faster than you can ever imagine. One of my clients said, "This is so much harder and easier than I thought." That's exactly what it is. And so it's about laying out a plan and doing these, what I call micro actions. They're very concrete. They take 20 minutes or less. If you do that every day, you will be in your new normal within 3 months, which for a lot of my clients is doing their own business or moving into a position that's a lot more creative in a really, really intentional way. But often what happens is that people find that if they're miserable at their work, and they just start connecting with community and doing creative things every single day, one of two things happens. Work either becomes entirely unbearable now that you see what's available to you, or the opposite happens, where you're so much less emotionally entrenched that everything's easier. You don't care anymore. And either way, that makes it so much easier to cut ties. When you start tapping into what is that core essence that I was always supposed to do, it becomes easier to follow that path.
I've got another question. A lot of people try to live up to the expectations of others, especially parents. And in the so-called American dream, I'm standing underneath the speaker. The American dream, house, car, 2 cars in the garage, all that kind of stuff. But then they find themselves way in over their head and all that, and then the job issue becomes a grind because that's what's paying the bills and all that. So how do you counsel somebody in that kind of situation to possibly change their values and walk away from that, which in the long run actually might be more beneficial because they might become more successful, kind of like the story you just told, yet it's not necessarily just a personal decision because they're thinking about all of the other outside factors that might be impacting the decision.
Absolutely. So the short answer is it's the same process. It's taking these baby steps until it starts to feel right. But one of the tools I have is I ask people to define success. And if you really sit down and you take some time and you process, how will I know if I made it? How will I know if I'm successful? It is rarely a dollar amount. Rarely. I don't know if I've heard a couple people say, yeah, but it's this and this, but I have to maintain a lifestyle. I understand that. But when it really comes down to what is your definition and how will you know if you hit it, I don't think I've ever heard a dollar number, ultimately. And once you connect with that, it makes it easier to make those choices. And ultimately, I find that people who do follow their core tend to actually be better off. Because the people that I've seen who stick with their thing long enough, and I'm not trying to exaggerate it, so because I'm in the wedding world, many of my first talks were for the special events industry. Major event coordinators are listed among the top 10 most stressful jobs in the world. And I had an audience of wedding and special event coordinators, and there were more than one person in the room who didn't make this change until they had a breakdown and were in the hospital. That's a little bit of an extreme, but I have seen where people get in that scenario where they're on the hamster wheel, they can't get off. And I always say, do you want to pay for it in therapy and medical bills? Or, do you want to take a 10% pay cut and do what you absolutely love? But ultimately, people who do follow their purpose tend to actually seem to have more sustainable lives, even financially.
Dawn, thank you for going outside the ordinary boundaries and talking about things that are scary when you start thinking about change. I'm wondering if you have used tapping, if you've heard about tapping as a way of behavior change, and as long as you've gone outside those boundaries, maybe you can talk about that.
Interesting question. I am familiar with tapping. I have tried it. It's not a tool that especially resonates for me, but I know it's worked really well for some people. I'd like to hear more what your thoughts were on it and what...
Hold on. Yeah,
okay, so tapping is something that I just ran across the other day and experimented with. It's using chakra centers and some of the languaging that you were using, excuse me, in terms of you visioning your best self. Mm-hmm. First talking about what's in the way, and then tapping on the different chakra centers. So if you look up tapping, Google it. It's a fascinating concept, and it really disrupts whatever kind of thinking about going back to your old behavior. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll step in on that. There's a technique called emotional freedom technique, and it involves that specific thing. And I've gone through a lot of therapy in my life, and I've used that and EMDR, and both of these get into the whole thing about remapping your neurons. But here's the catch. It's like if you have somebody who's really skilled at getting you to hold on to that cognitive area, it's sort of like a tree. If you want to start snipping at the little branches, fine, but if you get to that trunk, it will, and I can say from my own experience, you will remap in real time. And then the next day you wake up and it is gone. But again, it's like there's a lot of skill involved. I mean, you can do it on your own, but having someone trained to do that makes a difference. So I'll vouch for it.
Thank you.
EMDR is one of them, and the other one is EFT.
That's okay.
Eye movement, yeah. That one, it's two different styles of a technique, but the premise is you use a technique to remap your neural thing.
Good morning, Dawn. How are you?
Good morning and well, thanks.
I'll try to bring it back to Earth for a moment. Even though I'm tracking with what everyone's saying, can you talk about the significance of personal values? Because you've said it a few times, but I'm not sure, based on the work I do, many people really don't have their own working definition of values.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's a great question. Yeah, to me, that really is the heart of it. And, some of my clients are more spiritual, metaphysical than others. A lot of them are very kind of grounded in the more technical world. And to me, it really comes down to whether you call it your gut or your intuition or your higher self or whatever your language is for it. One of the studies I referenced, they actually did a study on the world's most successful financial traders and found that they were so in tune with their physiology when they were making these moment-to-moment buy-sell decisions on the trade room floors that they could sense subtle shifts in their blood pressure and their temperature and things like that. So just to tell you, there is some scientific grounding to trusting that inner voice. To me, the values, when we talk about the core, those 3 or 4 words, I don't know if any of you would be brave enough to share what yours was. That's a way to get to what do you value above all else. And I think there's a subtle difference between these things that we espouse or that we feel we are versus what we value above all else. But if you combine those, your sort of core essence of what you embody and then the things that you value and prioritize, if you can use those handful of things to make decisions, I have never known anybody to be discouraged or unfulfilled if they truly made a choice from that place. The biggest thing I've heard people regret in their lives is saying no to something that some deeper part of them knew they wanted to say yes to, or even bigger, saying yes to something that some part of them knew fell off, that they knew they were going to regret, and often staying with that for many years. So if you can live from that place of what do you value above all else, what is success to you, what is it to be a good person to you, you can't go off from that. That's your light, that's your intention, that's where you need to be living from, I believe.
Good morning.
Yes,
First
morning.
of all, thank you so much. It was very enlightening, very exciting talk. I guess my question for you is, do you feel like your message resonates differently with different generations? And if so, do you think it's because people get set in their own ways, or do you think it's a shift in awareness, consciousness, in like young people? And, yeah.
That's a really good question. So I'm being totally honest with it. I have an easiest time. I would say 90% of my clients are mid-30s to mid-50s. There's a reason for that. It's, I think, partly because I'm in that age group, so there's a connection, there's a human connection. But I think beyond that, there's a couple reasons for that. My hypothesis, and this is a generalization, not everybody fits this, is that those older than that, message does, I think, feel a little esoteric. Like it really takes some no, you're supposed to be practical first, The younger generation, the millennials, the hard time I have is the FOMO, right? So no matter how much we get to that place of, guess what? These are your values. Here's 3 or 4 things you could do with them. Let's lay out a game plan. It's often, yeah, but there's 500 other things I could do. True, but let's focus on a few and lay out a, yeah, but, so it's that sense of constantly coming back to, what if there's something else? What if there's something else? What if there's something else? I read a great piece a few years ago that was about, you don't have a soulmate career. It's true. If you can carve out a career that allows you to live from that core essence every day, it doesn't matter what it is. I am proof of that. I never thought all of this would turn into career coach and minister. Never. And I genuinely am fulfilled in my work every single day.
I've been working a lot and researching a lot about the belief system and how do we rewire our subconscious belief, because they say about pretty much 95% of what we do every single day is governed by our subconscious mind. And that is something that's not really accessible to us readily. I'm just wondering, what are some of the tools that you've used in your practice or come across that you feel would be the best to kind of help rewire that subconscious mind?
Sure. I'll give a short answer and then reference where you can go for a longer answer. The short answer is that part of you, whether you call it your intuition, your gut, whatever, is, again, this is probably going to sound esoteric to a lot of you, but it's like a muscle. It can grow. You can draw your attention to it more. You know Bader-Meinhof syndrome? Anybody? The idea that somebody tells you about the newest model of red Tesla and you haven't seen it yet, and the second you walk out from that conversation, you see it, and all of a sudden you can't stop seeing it everywhere. There's a billboard and there it's driving by, and then your friend talks about it. That's Bader-Meinhof syndrome. When you turn your mind on, if your mind doesn't have a construct for something, it doesn't know to look for it. Once it knows to look for it, it starts to see it everywhere. So that part of you, you can draw your attention to it, and you can actually grow your ability to make decisions from that place. So one of the simplest things I suggest to people is just spend a week really observing, how are you making every decision in your life, from little to big? How'd you decide what to wear today? How'd you decide what kind of coffee to get? Once you tune in to how your body responds and draw your attention to it, you start noticing more easily what feels right and what feels wrong. How much am I doing because every time I hear should, that's a red flag. So if you catch yourself saying, well, I knew I should be doing that, or somebody told me I should do that, or I should go, walk the dogs right now. We probably should go walk the dogs right now. But generally when I hear should, it's a red flag. So draw your attention to that, and it becomes easier to go, wait a minute, I don't think I do want to do that. Let me do what I actually want to do.
We live in a society and a corporate culture where a lot of people have had the trust between management and workers traumatized. And often it's not once or one place. My question is, do you have any tips, both for managers who are trying to help without being overly invasive, and also for employees who may not want to listen to the new age message of the day?
It's an excellent question, and in a way I don't want to diminish it by giving a full answer, because I've never been in the corporate world. Longest I worked a traditional 9 to 5 was 29 days. However, I do have one idea, and this is a tool that I use with my couples, for couples counseling, as well as for my clients. And this is kind of goes into Buddhist mentality a little bit, but Buddhist mentality, when you're dealing with a difficult emotion, what you feel like is a negative emotion, and that can be being in a negative space or having a negative perspective on something, is you ask yourself, what exactly am I feeling? And what can I do about it? So it's kind of taking back that control. So with couples who are having a hard time, it's how can you make a direct request? So often when we get into a sort of contentious situation, whether it's manager-employee or in a partnership, the idea is that one or the other either says or feels, well, be nicer to me. Stop being nasty to me. Don't be a bitch, right? But the other person is rarely, if ever, intending to do that. So that doesn't help the scenario. If instead you can go, this is what I'm feeling, what do I need for that to change? Then you can make a direct request. Whether that request is going to be acknowledged or received or done is up to the other person. But at least you've done something concrete about it, and then you have to learn to let go after that. That's the best advice I can give.
All right, so this might have already been covered, but there's been so much material that I just wanted to clarify. What do you personally think is the number one reason or the most commonly encountered reason for, I guess you could say, people not reaching their fullest potential?
Yeah, so I think it's that. Marianne Williamson has that really famous quote about, it is our light, not our darkness, that scares us. I think it's people not trusting that it's okay to just be in that space, as weird or awkward or funny as it is, and that it can be lucrative to be in that space, that you can make it in that space. I think a lot of it comes back to impostor syndrome, if any of you are familiar with impostor syndrome, right? That feeling that wherever you are, whatever you do, you're not going to be as good as the next person, like John was referencing, right? There's a great article, if any of you want, that I can send to you, but it has celebrities on impostor syndrome, and it's really cool, because there's all these like super, super famous people talking about how they can't believe that anybody looks up to them, and why did they, how did they, Meryl Streep and Jodie Foster, and it's a really cute article. But the point is that everybody experiences some level of imposter syndrome. Who am I to be so great? Who am I to have this position? Who am I to think I can make it as XYZ? Every single person has that. So at some point it's taking a leap of faith and going, who am I not to be? Somebody's got to live from that space. Why not me?
Two more questions.
So I'll live from that space. I have a question. So someone that's not like a businessy person such as myself, if just say, like I have like a Shark Tanky idea, right? But I don't have any of those entrepreneur connections. What does someone like me do with that idea or share with someone? Like A, how do I access those people? And B, how do I get it to a safe space with those people so I don't get, screwed at some point if the idea is actually good?
Yeah. Honor the parts that are authentic to you. And I'm a big believer in not, do I want to learn how to fix my car? Not really. If there's parts that are not natural to you and don't feel authentic to you, bring on an amazing team that fills in the gaps where you don't have them. And this is a great space for that. So maybe at announcement period, you get up and you say, look, I'm the visionary, I've got the innovation, I've got the idea, I don't have the business know-how, I don't have the connections, whatever it is that they're the pieces, and get a team together would be my suggestion.
So I love your thing about how to prepare for things that have never been done before. And I would guess that there's a lot of people in this room that are innovative and creative. And I'm just wondering, as you go into that realm and you're trying to communicate your ideas and people are looking at you like, okay.
How did you know that look? Were you, yeah.
Just being that disruptor all the time. And if you have any other thoughts, tools, when you're in that place and people are looking at you with that, and how to hold on to that vision and that purpose. And I really love the mini micro steps and whatnot. Yeah. But I'm wondering if you have any other thoughts to help stay grounded in that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That does happen a lot. A couple things. One is that when we are able to lay out that 90-day game plan and people can see how it breaks down, and that it doesn't mean that you have to just dive in all day, every day. It's literally about 20 minutes a day over 66 to 90 days. I think that's really reassuring to people because you start to, I think that's what happens with our minds is when we're in chaos, everything's swimming around with equal priority, right? Once you can map it out over month 1, month 2, month 3, it becomes a lot easier to digest. The other piece that I started doing the last couple of years is doing small groups in addition to the one-on-one. It's the absolute best part of my job, but it's like pulling teeth to get people to sign up for it every single time because it's terrifying to be in that, for most people, unless they've done something like that before, to be in that super vulnerable, raw transition phase, and then you're supposed to get together with other people and talk about it. But that is absolutely the light of my work because you get 4 or 5 people together and they go, what, you too? You feel that way too? Wait, what, you went through that same challenge, but you look so put together. You look like you know what you're talking about. You're feeling that too? And then of course sharing resources and holding each other accountable, and they send each other text messages every morning and, hey, did you do your jog? Did you do your meditation? That's been the best part of it. I don't know if does that get to it? Okay.
All right, thank you so much for the amazing question. That was an active and captive audience. You did a great job.
You guys are amazing.
Good stuff. Awesome. Yes. Okay, so we're gonna wrap up with you. Actually, before we do that, we got the drawing. You're gonna help us.